On December 23rd, 2022, Damien Chazelle released his fourth big movie, Babylon. And after being a huge fan of his other work, like Whiplash and La La Land, and I still haven't seen First Man, I was pretty excited to see this crazy new 1920s Hollywood-inspired movie by Damien Chazelle that had a decent budget. I believe it was on 80 million, and the movie came out, wasn't critically super well received. It was pretty divisive. Certainly fan feedback wasn't great. It made all in all like 63 million worldwide, so not even hitting its base budget. A certified flop, a classic example of a director having some goodwill and using that to make a crazy, very out there passion project in what I think is similar to someone like Ari Aster, who after doing Hereditary and Midsummer was able to do whatever he wanted, and he made Beau is Afraid, which also was a huge flop, also not critically well received, especially by audience, not well received really at all, and that movie, of course, was a flop too. But Babylon is weird because I went in with pretty high expectations, and especially when I heard stuff about it, I wasn't super looking forward to it because I was like, oh no, this isn't going to be great. And I ended up getting hit with a movie that was crazy. And I loved it for some reason in a way that I wasn't expecting. And I finally, a couple years later, have now been able to think about it, look back on it, and rewatch it. And I just want to talk about some stuff with this movie because I think it does a lot of stuff from a writing perspective very well. It's got a banging score, super well shot. And I think the themes are really well worked into the arcs and the characters in a very cool way. And it all in all is this weird meta movie, if you will, that I think does a lot of things super well. So the movie starts with this crazy party, 1920s Hollywood, roaring 20s, and it's this carefree attitude and this debaucherous, crazy party lifestyle that was going on in Hollywood in the early years of Hollywood as it was being formed. And we're introduced to an ensemble of characters at this huge opening party scene, like Jack Conrad, Nellie, and Manny, who I'm going to call our three kind of main trio of characters. Jack is introduced as a very carefree, fun-loving, crazy, popular guy who's just in this party lifestyle. He's on top of the world. And in the same scene, we're also introduced to a bit more of a genuine, caring side with him, where he has this friend George that is all depressed because his wife left him or whatever, and he asks his friend, who's Lady Faye, who's one of the other smaller characters, if she'll just talk to him to make him feel a little bit better. So just kind of showing a more genuine, layered side to him, already probably, 5-10 minutes into this movie. Also, the movie starts with our POV character, Manny, played by Diego Calva, and it's a very clear story of him starting at the bottom and kind of rising the ranks of Hollywood and of the Hollywood system as it goes along. We're introduced to Manny being one of the people delivering an elephant to this crazy party. He's covered in elephant doo-doo, which I guess is apparently where a lot of people already checked out of the movie in the first 5 minutes because it was so gross or whatever. But yeah, Manny's the eyes and ears of the audience. He introduces all these ideas during his conversation with Nellie about movies being important and his motivation and his drive. It's about he wants to be part of something bigger, something that means something. And we're also introduced to Nellie here, who wants to be a star and is also, I think, a very layered, interesting character in this. She's someone who wants to be well known. She also starts at the bottom, and it's clear from her first couple lines on screen that she is someone that is very much in control of her own life. And she's, as we'll kind of get more on later, this idea that she's disappointed people her whole life, she's disappointed her family, and she just wants to prove that she can't be controlled by anyone. She is a star of her own making, and she's going to be very true to her ideas from the beginning of the film all the way to the end. Also, some smaller characters. I already mentioned Lady Faye, who is a dancer of some kind. She is also going to get in a relationship with Nellie later in the film, but she knows Jack. We're introduced to Sydney, who is a black musician, part of this kind of lifestyle of this time, who just enjoys playing music with his coworkers, friends, whatever they are, and just being kind of in this Hollywood world. And there's Eleanor St. John, who is a gossip reporter and also clearly has some experience with Jack and their friends, coworkers, associates, whatever you want to call them. They know each other. They have an established relationship. And during this opening scene, it is very much a full display of this part of Hollywood, the debauchery, the sex, the drugs, the jazz music, the just craziness of it. And it's something that we can talk about, but I know some people have mixed feelings on how this film portrays this era of Hollywood, because some people think it's too over the top and too extravagant. And I understand having that perspective. And especially there's a sequence later in the film that we'll talk about, which I think goes a little bit overboard and kind of starts taking away from the message a little bit. But especially in this first party scene, I think it's great. It's a cool oneer that goes through introducing all the characters, a great score, and it just does what it needs to in establishing the lifestyle that all these characters are living in, the lifestyle of Hollywood at this time. And yeah, it's just a great demonstration of this era of Hollywood in a way that has never really been put on film like this before. And I don't know the full extent of how true certain things are. Obviously, things are over-dramatized, over-exaggerated for the sake of this film. But, I mean, that was a crazy time. There was some wild stuff, and I feel like some people underestimate just how insane and how not even out there some of the aspects of this film's portrayal of that era actually are. So, I think that's worth keeping in mind. And really, the first act of this film does a good job of putting the full display of the debaucherous, crazy party lifestyle of this era of Hollywood, but also showing off the magic of this era of Hollywood and what kind of is still to this day the magic of making movies. And a lot of this is demonstrated through Jack talking about how he owes people more and Hollywood needs to continue to inspire and innovate. And we'll get more on his character a little later and why he feels this way. But I love the scene at the set where Manny has to go and get the new camera, and Jack is drunk and talking about what movies are, and he has to really pull it together in that shot when he's doing that scene. And I feel like all of this really just captures the energy of making movies. It captures the energy of getting a shot perfectly with the sun setting and you're running out of time, and the magic of that moment, like the butterfly landing and Jack's doing that shot. And there's a lot that this movie is saying about the good and bad of Hollywood, which I think makes it such an interesting experience. But this is an example of that idea of the good and the magic and the importance of Hollywood and art and making movies being on full display, because you see it here and you see the magic in Manny's eyes of that moment when they get that shot just right with Jack doing the kiss. And it's his ability to turn on the acting in a second, and that's the Hollywood magic and the importance of making art and the way that it feels. And like I said, you see it in Manny's eyes. Also, from a production standpoint, I love the way that all of this is shot. It's got great whip pans, kind of exemplifying the chaotic nature of making films. And also, we get this bar scene where Nellie, because the last star of this film OD'd, Nellie now is taking on the role. And so she is really just putting all of her energy into being a star in this bar scene and being a bit provocative and just having her star power on full display. And all of this as well continues to show off the extremeness, the debauchery, the craziness of the pre-Hays Code era of film, like in the 20s and early 30s, where films that were produced during this time, they focused on a lot of crazy subject matter and a lot of bad subject matter, for lack of a better term, like bootlegging and prostitution and murder and sex, and that's just the way that the film industry went. And when the Hays Code was introduced, all of that changed, and all of Hollywood changed. And that's kind of where the first act of this movie ends, where we get a montage where Jack is still on top of the world, Nellie is rising in popularity like crazy, and life is pretty good. Brings us to the second act start in 1927, a year later, of course the year that The Jazz Singer comes out, and the idea of sound in pictures is introduced. And it directly cuts to us dealing with the challenges of shooting with sound. And this is one of these scenes that I've never forgotten from this movie, and that even some of the people I saw it with didn't love it. A lot of people didn't like it. Some of them liked it more. There were kind of opinions all over the board, but a lot of people loved this scene, and this definitely is one of the best scenes in the movie that demonstrates, similarly with the previous scene, both the crazy struggles from the plot level of making film now the sound is introduced, but also the magic of finally getting that moment and the relief that you feel and the importance. And also on top of that, showing off the sacrifices that people make to create art. And it reinforces this theme And again, it rises tension very well. It's edited perfectly. It's all in sync and in rhythm. There's proper handheld, proper shots that just, I think the scene is a kind of masterclass in editing, in pacing, and just in creating tension in the audience. And it's also thematically consistent with the characters and reinforces some themes throughout the film. So a banging scene. And there's also the snake thing where it's kind of introduced that Faye basically saves Nellie from this, and it's kind of introduced or hinted at earlier that Nellie may be into Faye. Whatever. I think this is some of the stuff in the movie that could be shaved down a bit, and I don't think this scene accomplishes much on a character level other than putting Faye and Nellie together, but that doesn't really matter in the long run. Faye, I think, is one of the characters that could probably be cut out of this film and you wouldn't be losing much. I kind of like the idea of her being someone that was dealing with discrimination, being an Asian American at this time, similar to Sydney, who was dealing with the struggles of being an African American. I think that's something that could be explored, but they don't really spend time on it, and I don't think in this already packed movie that's really needed. So I think this whole snake fighting thing and sucking the venom out, and I think it goes on a little longer than it really needs to. But throughout the second act, it kind of starts introducing Manny rising up in the role of an executive producer, and he starts producing these films for the studio, and he has this idea to put Sydney on camera now that music is in films, and that's going to be a big thing. And this is also where we start getting a lot of direct references to Singing in the Rain, and obviously Nellie's name is inspired by it. They do a recreation of the Pierre, Pierre, that whole scene that will go on in this universe to inspire Singing in the Rain. They do an example of the scene where Jack says that I love you, I love you. It's literally ripped straight from Singing in the Rain. But considering how meta this movie is, I think it works well in showing that off. So yeah, I think all the Singing in the Rain stuff works well. Also around this time, as the Hays Code is introduced and now there's sound in pictures, things start changing in the world of Hollywood, and people start caring more about morals and not being as lewd, and all that illicit subject matter is kind of gone. It's a thing of the past. People are all about being pristine and proper now. And this is kind of demonstrated through Jack's new wife, who he has a new wife like every act pretty much. He has a wife that he divorced and has a new wife. This new wife is someone who's a Broadway star, and it shows off this dynamic of the different art forms and how Jack views them, and how his wife from Broadway kind of looks down on films, and especially the films that were coming out around this time, and how Jack wasn't feeling like they meant something. He knew he was making crap. He still cared, but the system around him wasn't, that was just the way the studio goes, or the way the Hollywood system goes, which especially can, that's applicable to current Hollywood especially. So his friend, George, that he was very close with, kills himself, and this affects Jack deeply, obviously being a good friend, and this is kind of the worst, or this is kind of one of the big parts showing that everything from his world that he knows is disappearing, and he feels like he's being left behind. He's not talented enough to be a sound star, he can't perform the lines correctly, he just doesn't have he just doesn't have it to be part of the new Hollywood system and the new Hollywood culture. He's just being left behind. And it's something else that Jack loses in addition to his stardom and in addition to what he views as meaningful art. And another scene that I love, most of the best scenes I think in this movie involve Brad Pitt's character and his performance, which is great. But his scene that he has with his Broadway wife about how what happens on the screen means something, and it means something to real people, and his parents would pay to go to Nickelodeon's as opposed to going to Broadway because Broadway is obviously expensive. The tickets are high. It's supposed to be like a high class, high society kind of thing. And movies have always been for the common folk. Normal people could go escape for a little bit, and they mean something to a lot of people. It's inspiring art. So that's just a great scene that, again, hits at one of the many, I would say, thematic elements of this film. Also around this time, Nellie is of course trying to transition as well from this period of debauchery to sophistication. And again, very reflective of what people were looking for at this time. Again, like I said, in 1934, the Hays Code was introduced, which of course banned all these crazy, explicit depictions of sex and violence and what they like to call as sinful deeds, if you will, in movies. So just that was the way the Hollywood culture was changing. But it's also seen, obviously, on the surface. People are saying, oh, we don't want sex involved, we don't want violence, we don't want drugs, we don't want any of that stuff. But if you look just a little bit under the surface of Hollywood, of course, people are still vile, the way they treat Nellie, the way people act to Sidney. It's showing that that side of Hollywood is still there even after, on the surface, it's become a lot classier, which again can still be applied to the past 10, 15, 20, 30, the all history of Hollywood. So yeah, that's all, I think, great stuff, still very impactful. I do think this is where the movie starts losing a little bit of steam. It's still good, and like the party scene with Nellie, I think still works, and there's still scenes like the scene with Jack talking to his wife, and the next scene with Jack, where he talks about this scene that he has with Eleanor St. John, which we'll get to in a sec, but he sneaks into a theater and watches people laugh at him during the I love you, Singing in the Rain inspired thing, and it's kind of, showing him his like depression, and he's being left behind, and he just isn't able to adapt with the times. And the biggest thing that probably happens with Sidney in this film is that he is told by the studio executives that Manny works with that he's going to have to put on blackface makeup because his skin isn't dark enough and he's standing out with the other black musicians. And Sidney does it, he does his shoot, and then he quits. And we'll talk more about Sidney's character in a little bit, but that's his main arc that he deals with in this film. And another one of the best scenes in the movie that is very well written and well performed is a conversation between Jack and Eleanor. And this, more than any other scene, I would say, really hits home the thesis of the film, if you will. This idea that film, like all art, is eternal, and what it's saying is eternal. And you're immortalized in a sense when you're put on the big screen and people can watch you 100, 200 years later. She says that there will always be 100 more Jack Conrads, there will always be 100 more hers. They're just part of this cyclical nature of Hollywood. And it's an ever-evolving art form. It's an ever-evolving industry. And it's bigger than just Jack and just Nellie and just Eleanor. And they'll all be gone one day. And they'll just be part of the Hollywood system at that time, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean something. They'll live eternally. She says you'll spend eternity with angels and ghosts, which is a line I really like. And in a sense, he'll be alive again and immortalized anytime someone watches a film of his. And I think this is such a cool message. It's a very true message, and it's, again, part of something that, especially with the ending, we'll kind of dive into a little bit more. But I just think this is a very well-performed scene. And if you were to point to one scene other than the ending where the thesis is essentially told to the audience in a way that I think is still pretty well done, it's not just the audience, here's the message, blah, blah, blah. I think it's done pretty well, and especially very well performed. I do think we're kind of going into the last hour of the movie now, that this is where it starts to go off the rails a little bit, and where I think the pacing especially starts to feel off, because this movie's 3 hours, which I know is a hang-up for a lot of people. And up to now, there's not really much that I would have cut, other than maybe slim down the snake bit a little bit, like a few things here or there, but overall, it's still all informing character, and it's still pretty good dialogue, and I think it all works. And then we get this thing where Nellie, it was established earlier, she had a gambling addiction. She goes to Manny for help, and she's like, hey, I owe these people money, you gotta help me get the money, whatever. So Manny goes with his friend to Tobey Maguire's character's house, who's this zany, wacky, eccentric guy who they're trying to basically scam with fake prop money, and he takes them to this underground, crazy, cockfighting type, I don't even know. It's basically trying to exemplify, okay, here is this new pristine kind of Hollywood, but also underneath the surface, like I was saying, there's all this crazy, absolute, insane, gross sex, like crocodiles, like tiny people fighting, like it's just an insane thing. And this is where I was like, okay, I think you may be going a little bit too over the top here, because there is straight up crazy murder here. like Manny accidentally kills some dude, and it just, I think, goes a little bit too over the top. And it's supposed to be, like I said, this idea where depravity still lives, but I just don't think it adds much on a thematic level that wasn't already present in the rest of the film. I suppose you could try and make the argument that it shows off the violent side of Hollywood in a way that hasn't really been demonstrated earlier in the film, but I still feel like you got the impression of that with the extras all fighting, and there was some pretty clear violence happening to all those extras in the great shooting scene earlier in the film. So I just don't think I think it's a waste of time. I don't think it accomplishes much on a plot level because the only thing it does is really get the gangster mobs or whatever after Manny as well as Nellie. But I think they could have just been after her because they could have just been after him because Manny was helping her. I don't think he needed to get directly involved like that. Or you could say that it really scared him into leaving because he gets shot and just barely lives. But I think you could have done that in a way quicker and easier scene than dragging us down into this weird sex blood dungeon with Tobey Maguire and just kind of completely throwing the pacing off a little bit. I just don't think it's necessary in the slightest. So that is by far my biggest gripe with this movie, that I still really love, but I just wish it was a 2-hour and 30-minute movie. Trim down the snake stuff, trim down a couple things here and there, and cut out that Tobey Maguire sequence, and I think you've got a fantastic, 9 or 10 out of 10 movie for me. So after this, we get Jack's suicide, which is a great sequence. You, of course, feel it building throughout the film, and I love this. The music as well, Justin Hurwitz, we'll talk about score a little bit. It's super well shot. It's a tracking oneer following him up the stairs. He tips this bellboy all his money, and then we just watch from a view through a cracked door as he shoots himself, and it's perfect. And this transitions into a montage showing the end of the Hollywood era, the classic Hollywood era, and it's with all these different news articles and a little montage of films. It shows that Eleanor died. It shows that Sidney was able to get out and actually be one of the only people to escape the Hollywood system. He understands the cost of being in Hollywood. He was true to himself, and he was able to see how that system takes everything out of you, and thankfully he was able to live an assumedly happy rest of his life, which is cool to see. And we also see that Nellie dies, of course, which I think isn't expected. And I know some people don't love how she basically just walks into the black and the dark, and that's just it. But I do like that because I think it's I think her dying by staying true to herself and her ideas and her being in control of her own life by making all these decisions, I think that's in line with her character, and I think it makes sense that she got killed by these people that she was in a gambling debt with. So I think that's a makes sense ending for her character. And yeah, so that takes us to the end of the film. 1952, Manny returns with his family. I think he said he owns a shop in New York now. And Manny returns. He goes into a theater. They're playing Singing in the Rain. He starts crying. And then we get this crazy, crazy out there montage of movies and film and the evolution of film as an art form and just what it all means, just with crazy flashes of color, film strips of all of their history being colored, stuff earlier in the film, a crazy Voodoo Mama is the name of the track, music playing during that scene, and then it cuts to him, still in tears, but now being able to smile and appreciate all of that, and that's how the film ends. And I think this ending is so, so good. And this is able to take the themes of the film and put them on display in a very, very out there way. And I know it didn't work for a lot of people. I know seeing Avatar, Jake Sully, in their 1920s period piece threw them out of it. But I thought it worked so well in giving a real life example of just how applicable this is and how, it almost makes the events of the movie feel real in a sense, because you've just spent the past 3 hours watching how the Hollywood system eats people up and ruins them and kills them, and you watch these people sacrifice their lives for this art form. But also, films and art genuinely matter. They affect people. They're timeless. They change people's lives. Films as an art form are constantly building off one another. Like this conversation with Eleanor and Jack really established, art and film is a cyclical nature. It's all of these people kind of going in a loop and building off of this and building off of this. And maybe cyclical is not even the right word, but it's a constant evolution. It's a constant change. And it's incredible how we're able to do the things we are now with film in the 2020s by, basically the people whose lives were sacrificed to get the film industry to where it is today. And it's such a cool scene that is able to demonstrate the good and the bad in a great way. It's not taking a hard stance either way. We see the sadness. We see Manny crying and in tears, thinking about how he lost Nellie, thinking about how Jack died, thinking about how even the dude in the cinematographer in the heated up room died. All these people that were sacrificed for the art form that all died. That's bad, and that's a critique, and that's why, the transition from silent films to talkies is a great time period to explore this. But that is what the film is saying, is that is bad, and that we need to appreciate and acknowledge that happened, and that people sacrifice for art. And also, it gives us this crazy montage watching from Passion of Joan of Arc to Terminator to Singing in the Rain to Avatar. All this crazy evolution of the art form that has happened. And I think it serves primarily as a critique of this era, but it's also a celebration of filmmaking and, for better or for worse, the machine that's used to create films. This ending was such a crazy, giant swing, and again, I know it didn't work for a lot of people, and I get it, maybe, but it just hit home so hard for me when I started seeing all of that I was like, oh, I really see what you're trying to do. You're trying to be something bigger than the movie Babylon. And there's even a picture of the clapper board for Babylon in that montage at the end. It's just such a smart way to completely encompass what this movie is trying to say and acknowledge that it's bigger than this movie Babylon. So that's why the fact that I actually think it's kind of poetic in the fact that this movie was so divisive, and the fact that it was a flop, and the fact that, to a lot of people, they didn't care about this movie and it didn't mean anything. But that's almost poetic with what this movie's trying to say and how important it is. Because I do think this movie's timeless in a sense because of what it's saying and because of the nature of art and the systems that are used to create art, especially when art is in a system in America where film is a business, for better or for worse, and that determines the films that are made and how the people that make those films, how their lives are affected. So it's just great, and I think that the montage mixed with all the coloring of the different film strips and the flashes of Nellie, Jack, and all the others who we lost, and the mix of tears from remembering the stories about Jack, Nellie, and their sacrifice, but also combined with his smile of admiration and of pride around what the industry has become, and just a general appreciation of not only film, but as art and what art means and how important art is. So that's my little spiel about the ending. I get why some people don't like it, but I think it's hard to say that it wasn't a crazy effective and thematically consistent way to enforce it. So yeah, that is my little thing about Babylon. A quick little go through it. I just wanted to yap a little, say some stuff. I think viewing this movie, trying to critique it, I think it does a lot of stuff really well. I think it's got 3 great characters. I think it's got some stuff it's especially trying to say with Sydney and Eleanor. I think you could cut Faye out and have not too much lost in the film. I think you could cut the Tobey Maguire stuff and not lose much on a plot level. And I think you could rework all of that and just clean it up a little bit. I think one of my friends said this when we were talking about it when the film came out, but he just needed someone in there to say, maybe clean this up a little bit, maybe tighten this up, maybe don't go that far with this one thing. I think that would have made this movie a little bit better. I still think it's a pretty great screenplay. I think it's got some great dialogue. I think that it's really well shot, a proper use of oneers, a proper use of whip pans, like I said, in the one scene to kind of emphasize the crazy, chaotic nature of it, a great use of quick cuts and great editing. I'm kind of surprised this didn't get an editing nom at the Oscars, but whatever. Very well shot, and Justin Hurwitz's theme is, of course, great. Manny and Nelly's theme, of course, kind of similar to me and Sebastian's from La La Land, but it's a motif that works well. It's first introduced when they first meet, and it fades out for the last time in the movie as Nelly walks into obscurity and into her death, essentially, when she walks into just the black void. And I love the main theme for this film because it really is a theme that is kind of saying or portraying a sense of chaos. It's a very crazy theme, and most times when that theme is playing in this film, it's a crazy montage or it's a crazy scene showing how films are made and showing the crazy chaotic nature of that stuff, or it's how they rework it into the end with that Voodoo Mama thing and the whole montage of Hollywood Evolution. I just think it's a great score, really well shot, crazy good performances that I can't believe didn't get more. I love Brad Pitt in this, and Margot Robbie. I know the Oscars are stupid and they don't matter. I know that, but I do think it's weird that there wasn't even a lot of talk about a Margot Robbie nom for this because she is great. And Diego Calva, I really want to see in something again as well. So the three of them did it, and I don't know. I just want people that like movies to watch this if they haven't, or people that care about art in any way, because I think there's so much to appreciate. And it's rare that I see a movie in a theater and I walk out from the ending and I'm like it hits me in a way that is rare. And that happened with Babylon. And I don't know the last time I watched a movie. I mean, that was 2 years ago, and I have yet to really be hit that way. It's happened once or twice, but there's maybe 1 or 2 movies a year that do that. And Babylon was one of the ones in recent memory that has done that, and that had me thinking for weeks and weeks about it. So I love this movie. It's not perfect. It's flawed, for sure. But it does way too much well and is doing way too much and saying way too many important things to be slept on the way it is, in my opinion. That's all I got. See you next time. Go watch Babylon if you've got 3 hours to spare.